Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the West of England Combined Authority Audit Committee. I would just remind members that this meeting is being broadcast live on the authority's YouTube channel. And I would remind those... Good morning and welcome to this meeting of the West of England Combined Authority Audit Committee. I would just remind members that this meeting is being broadcast live on the authority's YouTube channel. And I would remind those... Good morning and welcome to this meeting. Right. Can you all now hear me?
Yes, Chair.
I'm not sure what happened then, because I ended up with the YouTube channel broadcasting. But anyway, apologies for that. I would just remind people on the YouTube channel that we are struggling to cope with virtual technology, as I just proved. So please bear with us as we take a little time to get these things working. We have apologies this morning from Tom Davis and Brendan Massey, and welcome Matthew McCabe and Joe Sargent, who are substituting for them. Can I also specifically welcome Mark Hartcliffe, who is our new independent member. Mark, it's good to see you. Thank you for joining us. And can I also welcome Sophie, and I can't read my handwriting, Morgan Bauer, who is our new audit manager from Grant Thornton. So welcome, Sophie. We'll try and be on our best behaviour this morning. Can I also just say that in terms of agenda items, we're going to play around with the agenda a little because Jeff Ring, our Chief Internal Auditor, has a number of meetings today. And I've taken the view that we shouldn't let him go before he's had chance to deliver on all the items that are on the agenda that relate to him. So we will be taking specific internal audit items straight after item 5 on the agenda. And then I will take items in the order that seem most relevant where Jeff may have a contribution. So there will be a slight disorder to the agenda. The final thing is that given the wonders of technology, it would be useful if we could have someone who could take over chairing the meeting should I find myself disconnected. Do I have a willing volunteer?
I'd be happy to if
nobody else will. Hang on. I had John and Cleo up at the same time. Who's keenest?
Me.
Cleo's fine. Is everybody happy that Cleo stands in should I be disconnected? And John can stand in if Cleo and I should both be disconnected. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda, declarations of interest under the Localism Act 2011. Anybody got any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of our meeting of the 27th of February. They've been circulated. Are members happy that we approve those as a correct record? Anybody against? No? Okay, I will do that. Item 4, public forum. We have statements and 2 questions from Dave Redgewell. Is David joining the meeting?
Hi, Chair. As you say, we had 2 questions. The answers to those questions have been circulated. We have one person making a statement, Mr. Dave Redgewell, who I believe is in the waiting room. So if we can ask Suzanne to let Mr. Redgewell in to make his statement, please.
Good morning, David.
Morning, Jeff. Right, so I'd like to...
You have 3 minutes for your statement, David.
Thank you. My concerns on behalf of the transport user groups are how the money is being spent under the coronavirus bus operator grant that is being given by the government, Department for Transport, to WECA and commercially to the bus operators in the Greater Bristol area and Bath to spend on bus services that are no longer commercially viable. And there's been various tranches of money come through from central government, Department for Transport, that WECA has spent. We're not saying initially the money wasn't well spent. Certainly during the emergency situation, the Mayor and Peter Mann did extremely well. I think it's been the recovery situation that's more worried us and how the money is then been allocated at that particular point. And we're talking about the uplifts on the 1st of June, when the government insisted on more services running for people to be able to access essential shops and shops opening on the 15th of June. And then on the 4th of July, for the opening of the restaurants and public houses and hotels and tourism industry. And at that point, they did expect the evening and weekend services to be restored. Well, unlike Gloucestershire County Council, where the services are restored, and also Wiltshire County Council, in Weka, we still have 11 routes not operating, and we still have vast areas without weekend services. And the town of Marshfield has not had a bus for 4 months. Now, these were council contracts under South Gloucestershire. This is public money, and the audit trail needs to be very clear on how it's being spent, very clear on where the government's spending this money, and very clear on negotiations with HCT Group, First Group, Stagecoach, A-Bus, and Fairsaver, and the smaller bus operators. We were also concerned to see that a number of community transport buses were withdrawn under HCT Group, and simply the staff were followed. And these were buses to hospitals in South Bristol, and leaving South Bristol Hospital with very poor bus services. Now, the government's made it quite clear in planning terms from Grant Chap that they must carry out consultation with the unitary authorities, consultation with passenger groups. This is government guidance from the department, and consultation with the users and the town councils. Now, I'm not sure this is happening. I'm certainly aware of it happening in Dorset, aware of it happening in Gloucestershire, and aware of it happening in Wiltshire. Not sure much WECA consultation takes place as a public authority, and it is the Transportation Authority, no longer the councils. So this is a very important issue for the Chief Executive to pick up and start to deal with, because there is clear government guidance and instruction on this, and also from Transport Focus. On the railway side, I'm concerned about, having watched the work of a very good mayor in the sense of Andy Burnham and Andy Streets, about the way they're delivering their rail plans. And I don't see clear money audit of the rail industry money going in. I see money going into Temple Meads and the Arch, the Eastern Entrance, very clearly 2.5 million, then increased again. I do not see clear direction for how, and Tina Biggs shares this view from Fosborough, how we are spending the money on delivery targets for stations such as Ashley Down, Filton North platforms, Henbury, where those targets for actually opening those stations are, what the delivery dates are with public money. Equally, on the Porter's Head line, the dates seem to change on Peel Station, on Porter's Head. We've got to have a clear rail delivery plan with clear rail money spent by WECA.
Can you come to a conclusion, David, please?
We must audit this money and make sure there's clear delivery, clear targets. We can't just hand public money over to private operators or to public bodies without having clear targets, Jeff. And I think that is where we're really concerned at this moment, about making sure there's clear audit trails, and actually clear delivery plans. And there's full public consultation by what is the Transportation Authority now for the West of England. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Can I just ask members how you feel we should deal with that statement? My feeling is that we should probably be referring that to WECA Audit Committee for attention. As I understand David's comments about it being an audit trail, but it's actually a management role rather than an audit committee role. Would members be happy if we go down that route?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
I think the audit have a role in this because our role as well as actually looking at the cash, is to find out that we've got the proper processes. And if we're not actually doing what is required, then we need to be asking why.
Chair, if it helps, I could talk around the financial side of Mr. Redwell's points. Would that help?
Yeah, please.
So in terms of transparency, the WECA investment programme, the £350 million programme, is completely in the public domain. So we are really clear about every project we are delivering. That's been published in every investment fund report which goes to the WECA committee. There is a rail programme. It's clear what's in there: Metro West 1, 1A, 1B and Metro West 2. Not all of the stations that Mr. Redwell referred to are in our current investment programme, but members will be aware that we've got limited cash and we've been really clear about what we're spending that cash on. In terms of a bus spend, he did submit 2 written questions, and you'll see the responses which are being circulated round to members. It's very clear what we spent the money on. The one question I can't answer is the degree of consultation regarding the bus routes and how those are reopened. So I could take that away and ask relevant people in WECA and get a response to members if that's helpful.
If you would, Malcolm, I think that would be very helpful. Okay. So we ask Malcolm to do that, but we do meanwhile raise it with the scrutiny board as well, and I'm sure David will be raising it with them at their next meeting. Okay, members happy with that? Okay, thank you. So we then move on. Item 5, we've had no petitions. So I am then going to move to item 9, which is the internal audit annual report for 2019-20, which is pages 87 to 96 in your pack. And I'm going to hand over to Jeff.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for moving the agenda around. It's very much appreciated. Just like to briefly introduce Mark Wheeler, who's also on the call today. He's one of my internal audit managers. Mark was involved in almost all of the audit work we are reporting on today. So if you obviously have any detailed questions, he can help with these as well. So today we have basically 2 reports being presented, and the first is our annual report for 2019-20. As we discussed at our last formal meeting, our internal audit work totaled 90 days in 2019-20, and we report updates to you during the year. And this is the summary end of year report. So I'll assume you've had a chance to look through this, and I'm just going to quickly highlight a few points. So the report starts with a summary dashboard of most of our KPIs to draw your attention to the key issues and give you a snapshot of the work undertaken. Section 4.3 of the report highlights we've completed 100% of the plan, which is obviously positive from an assurance point of view to the committee. And we've highlighted the work which is ongoing around financial systems, which the committee have discussed in detail BE4. Section 4.4 highlights all the audits were completed inside the expected time. 4.5 details feedback from all activities, which again is a small summary of some of the comments received. Section 4.6 details the results of a follow-up process on audit recommendations, and you can see that of the 20 or so recommendations we followed up and checked, 4 had not been fully implemented. These were medium risk recommendations, and we summarise the reasons for that in this section. It's my view that I'm not unduly concerned about these based on the management responses, and we've summarised those for you in that section. Section 4.7 on investigations, whistleblowing, etc. detail that there was no formal cases received or investigated during the year. I say this refers to formal cases. There was a small amount of work around investigating potential scams and checking their validity, or otherwise there's absolutely nothing of significance to report to the committee. Section 4.8 details our overall view on assurance, and this is broadly similar to last year. And again, there are no areas with limited assurance or significantly weak controls to report taken. And finally, section 4.10 summarises my overall opinion on the internal control environment. In terms of your terms of reference, this is important both for the committee and other stakeholders such as external audit, and it's my view that I can give reasonable assurance on the internal control environment for the reasons detailed in the report. Finally, there are 2 appendices to the report. First one is a table summarising the audits we've done in the opinions, and the second is a slightly longer one giving summary detail of some of the audits undertaken, as this was previously requested by the committee. So we're asking for the contents of the report and formal opinion to be noted, and I'm very happy to take any questions on the report itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. So I've got Andy Waite with a question. Andy?
Thank you, Chair. It's page 90, section 4.6. There's 3 bullet points there, and it's to do with the fraud aspects. And it says the fraud aspects are currently at a very low level within WECA management. And so it's decided that counter fraud within the e-learning training should not take place. My question is about Aggresso. Does that come into the training of Aggresso? Does it mean that under a new system, the fraud is managed in a different way? I'm just a little concerned that it's wonderful that fraud is such a low risk, but I'm slightly nervous about the fact that you're not going to train for that issue now. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's probably, I mean, Malcolm can come in and comment as well in terms of the management response to that. But obviously Aggresso is a widely used financial management system across local authorities. And obviously we carry out a lot of work, and Section 151 and his finance team, Solange, etc., spend a lot of time working through the detailed financial controls, working through how they protect against fraud risk. So our recommendation is, as you can see, and was, that we would prefer to give more proactive training, but the management response is, as you can see. In terms of making a judgment about that, that is very much a judgment piece. You know, I'm happy to review that again with Malcolm. I don't know if he's got any further comments he wants to make about that in terms of a particular recommendation.
Happy to come in, Chair. So I don't want members to think we're taking fraud lightly in any way, shape, or form. Clearly, fraud is very much in our world, in the world we live at the moment. So, but in terms of WECA and the transactions and the financial transactions we have, we're nowhere near like a unitary authority. We don't have council tax, we don't have the same level of business rates or payments going out our system. So what we're suggesting is, we're not saying the recommendation was around specific fraud training. And we felt actually what would be better to incorporate fraud as part of the deduction packages for members joining WECA. And we also send circulars of communication out to our staff. So it's not that we just didn't feel it's appropriate to have specific training to all WECA staff on fraud related issues, because we're really not that sort of authority in terms of the number of financial transactions that we make.
Yeah, and just the other thing to do, just worth mentioning, we also compile what's called a fraud bulletin as well, which we also share with all of our authorities that we provide internal audit services to. So that's also available to WECA. And the purpose of that is, again, to raise awareness to all staff of the issues, fraud cases across the country, best practice, etc. So it's not just about the individual training in terms of that particular recommendation, but the point is well made and taken.
Thank you, that's clear.
Okay. Jeff, I had one slightly tongue-in-cheek question, which probably could be an exam question for trainees, but is it best practice for internal audit to aim for 100% customer satisfaction? Is there not an element where one would anticipate there may be an element of dissatisfaction from customers? And I'm really just intrigued to...
No, you are absolutely right. I mean, obviously, any function, any service should be listening to its clients, its customers, the people that it's delivering services for. So customer feedback is essential, obviously, in any business. Internal audit, we have professional standards which require us to seek customer feedback. The methods in which we do that are obviously very varied, and we are reviewing those this year in terms of what's the most appropriate method to receive feedback. because obviously you're quite right. If you reviewed a particular area and let's say found extreme level of weaknesses and very poor in control environment, the auditees may not be overly happy about that. On the other hand, often what we find is by working with teams and functions and services and senior management, is that often they're looking for help about areas that may be weak and how to improve those areas. So I think it's important to get that feedback, to listen to that feedback. I don't aim for 100%. What I'm more interested is in the detail of the comments that we actually receive, to ensure that the quality of the service that we're providing is good, and to ensure that we listen to the way in which we deliver our own particular service.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I'm not seeing anybody else. Have I missed anyone? No. Okay, in which case we note the annual report and we move on to item 10, the 2021 audit plan, pages 97 to 108. So again, with you, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is the second report, as you say, follows on from the last one, which looked backwards to 1920. So this is one looking forwards to 2020-21. At our last formal meeting, we did actually discuss this at some length. And in terms of the content and the plan and the process, we did actually have a good conversation about the content of the plan. So I don't plan to go through it in detail, but I just want to raise the following sort of key points. So just to re-emphasize, our role is to independently review the internal control environment and to provide the committee and key stakeholders with assurance about its efficacy, and the plan sets out how we do this. The plan is subject to wide consultation, including yourselves, as we discussed previously at our last formal meeting, and the audit committee's role is to ultimately approve it. It forms a key part of your assurance framework as the third line of defence, and again that's set out in the plan document. So our approach is to independently review the control environment, and we use what's called our reasonable assurance model over our 8 themes, focusing on risk and assurance in each one of those particular themes. And again, that's something we've talked about with the committee in some detail in previous meetings. And the results of this assessment, again, are included in the plan document at Appendix 1. So the plan's, always going to be limited by the quantum of resources that we have. So we don't review everything every year, which is why we can only give reasonable assurance and not full assurance. We look at elements on a risk basis. So the plan can always change. And indeed, after we compiled and agreed, and that's clearly has changed the dynamic for how everyone operates and works in the most significant way possible. So in terms of the constituent authorities, the impacts of COVID-19 on their organisations and consequently the audit plan are highly significant. And it means in many cases, the original plans will change significantly. I think in terms of WECA, however, we took a slightly different approach in that, as Malcolm previously said, it doesn't deliver frontline services in the same way that our constituent authorities do, and it's not exposed in the same way as a result to other risks, such as the loss of direct income. So we decided that rather than put very precious time aside for COVID-19 specifically, which would leave us almost nothing left in the plan for anything else, we would consider the impacts of COVID in terms of every single review in the plan. And we would work with the Section 151 officer on the detailed scoping and briefs to ensure we covered that area, but in a more considered and specific way. However, everything changes. This whole situation is extremely fluid, and it doesn't mean that we wouldn't change that approach. And it's self-evident that the economic impacts, where WECA obviously clearly has a large role, will be huge in terms of our local economy. So we will formally review this position with the Section 151 at the 6-month point. And if we do decide to make those changes, obviously we would report those back to the committee at its next meeting. So the plan is attached. Appendix 1 is detailed in terms of the numbering. And as I've said, the list of the planned audits for 2021 are on page 107. And we're asking the committee to approve the plan, and obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions from anybody? No? In which case, do I assume we note the report and approve the plan? All those in favour, just raise a hand. Anybody against? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can't go just yet, Jeff, because we're now going to go to item 8, which is the annual governance statement on pages 73 to 86, and would appreciate if you are able to stay with us just in case there are internal audit comments in respect of issues on the AGS. Malcolm, are you introducing this item?
I will, Chair. I noted on the chat as well, Chair, that members would like us to share the screen to see the documents. Can I just check with Tim? Is it okay if I share the screen so we can see the documents simultaneously?
I think it's fine as long as all the councillors can still see each other on screen.
Okay, here we go. Okay, can members see that?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is the annual governance statement. It's one of 3 reports on today's agenda, which is linked to our statement of accounts. So I thought it's best to start off by just explaining the context to members. Normally, in a standard year, we would have the authorities' accounts, draft accounts, published on the website by the end of May. Because of COVID, there's been a national relaxation in terms of time limits. So rather than giving you the full set of accounts in one go, what we decided to do this time around is present certain documents to this committee now, so you can see where we're evolving. And the full set of accounts will be submitted to the audit committee in September, after the external audit has taken place in August. So this is the annual governance statement. It is an integral part of our statement of accounts. It describes our assurance framework. Personally, I think we've got a very robust governance framework. I think we've done a lot of work in improving our assurance, particularly around areas such as risk management and monitoring performance management. I think now we're in the 3rd year of operation of a combined authority. We've got quite a sound assurance framework. The most important part of most of the document describes what the framework is. So if I go into the appendix, a lot of this you'll probably recognise if you're on the committee last year. It explains the certain assurance frameworks and the components we have in place. The important part is we have to form a view about what are the key risks that affect the combined authority. And remember, the accounts relate to last financial year, 1920, year ending March 2020. So in the document itself, we describe what the strategic direction of the authority is. It shows how we have a local industrial strategy, how our strategic documents link to our investment strategy, how the investment program is all interlinked into the operations of the combined authority. But as I say, I'm going to jump right to the punchline, which is the end of this, which is what are the key governance issues that we feel that we have to consider as a combined authority, considering all of the environmental aspects. The 2 we've got on here, you won't be surprised to read that the first one is around coronavirus. It is a governance issue for every authority clearly in the country. What we have here, we've shown what we've done as a combined authority to mitigate and manage the environment with the coronavirus. Clearly, the operations of WECA have continued to a large extent. We've run virtual full WECA committee meetings. The decision making and delivery is still going ahead as if we were actually physically in the office. So it is a risk, but we are managing that risk and mitigating the risk in terms of the operations of WECA. The second area we're reporting on here is around the actual robustness of our statement of accounts. And those members who were on the committee last year will remember we had quite a bumpy ride in signing off the accounts last financial year in 18-19, mainly because we didn't lead the process internally as WECA. We relied on contractors to deliver it for us. This year in 19-20, we've done a lot of work to actually build more financial resilience in the WECA finance team. And as members will know, we've also in the process of implementing a new Aggresso finance system, which would automate a lot more of the information flow into our accounts. So there are important issues that we're reporting on. We're very mindful of the risks, and we feel we've done our best to mitigate those risks. But as I say, this is a formal requirement of the accounts. We have to have an annual governance statement. and it needs to be signed off by our mayor and chief executive. So it's in front of the committee today, just for reference and any comments you might have regarding the assurance framework.
And just to support what Malcolm has said, so our role in internal audit is to independently review that framework. So we would discuss with Malcolm any significant issues, as Malcolm's talked about, for recommendation for inclusion. And we'll check through the government statement and in terms of the framework to make sure it all looks appropriate. So we'll work with management in terms of that process. So it is a management statement, as Malcolm said, so the chief exec and the mayor signs it off, but the audit committee clearly has an important role in that process.
Right, I'm looking to see if anyone's got any questions. Malcolm, if perhaps I just start the ball rolling, not more as a matter arising from the statement. When we had an informal meeting with you a while back, we did ask for an update on the accounts preparation. And given it's been identified as a potential weakness, I'm just wondering if you could update the committee and give some reassurance on the progress with the statutory accounts and moving towards removing that weakness.
Sure, Chair. So part of the statutory accounts is presented to this meeting. So the annual governance statement and the narrative statement, which is item 7 on this agenda, will form part of the overall statement of accounts. And as I said, I felt it was best if we actually give it to you in chunks rather than a complete document, which will be 120 pages long. Now, as I said, we've led the process this year. I think last year we were caught a little bit cold because our contractors were doing our accounts for us, in effect. Solange, who's on this call, and the finance team have been actually leading the whole process. We haven't ditched the safety blanket, so we've contracted CIPFA, who are the industry experts in terms of technical support into the accounts. At the moment, we've got draft accounts with CIPFA, who are quality reviewing them. So those are the core statements: your balance sheet, your cash flow statement, your profit and loss in effect. That's all with CIPFA at the moment. The feedback we've got back from CIPFA has been pretty positive. So they have raised issues, but fairly minor in nature. So personally, I'm sat here today thinking we're much more in control of the process. It's been a huge amount of work from the finance team going into the accounts because most of the transactions have been reliant on spreadsheets again, because the Aggresso system obviously wasn't live for 1920. So we've had to pull the data from the O'Bain system in pulling them into the accounts. But do I feel much more confident in terms of where we are now compared to last year? Absolutely, Chair. So the committee will see the full set of accounts in September, by which stage Grant Thornton External Audit would have undertaken their audits during August, and I feel we're in a much better position than we were. So
if I just follow on from that, Malcolm, can you also confirm that the implementation of Aggresso is going according to plan, and you remain confident that that will massively improve the situation when it comes to the 2021 accounts?
Can I say it's gone according to plan? No, mainly because our implementation, which was deliberately phased for the new financial year, was rudely interrupted by COVID. So will it massively increase or improve our information? Absolutely. And we're sat here today, mid-July, and the system isn't fully functional. It's up and running. We're paying people. We haven't got all the reporting out of the system yet, but it's a matter of a couple of weeks. So actually, the system, we have owned the whole process in pretty much designing a bespoke version of Aggresso, which is fit for purpose for Weka. And it is a very good version of the system. We are happy about what it will deliver for us. But there has been inevitable delays, both in terms of the technical aspects in actually implementing it, because of COVID has sucked away capacity in other priority areas for the technicians. So it's been delayed, but it is up and running now. But as I say, it's going to be a couple more weeks before we get the information out of it in terms of regular reporting, which is what we need for our budget holders to really own the budget process.
So finally, on this aspect of it, could we Well, can I suggest that we have a report at our next meeting just to confirm progress? Because clearly monitoring the progress throughout this financial year is going to be best for all concerned, rather than finding there are issues at the end of the year when we're facing deadlines. So could we just have a not detailed, but a brief report updating us at the next meeting?
More than happy to do that, Chair. I'd just like to confirm to members that all of our financial information is in our new Aggresso system, so all the transactions are in there, but it is about actually being able to pull the reports off. But I'm more than happy to report back to the next committee, Chair.
Thank you, Malcolm. Right, I don't see any other hands up, so in which case we are requested to note the annual governance statement, and I think I'll just check all members are happy that we do so. If you just wave a hand at me. Yeah. And no one against. Okay, right. Thank you. So we now revert back to item 6, which is informing the audit risk assessment for WECA. That's pages 13 to 48. Jeff, when you feel the need to leave us, please do. But equally, you're welcome to stay for as long as you feel able. So this item, Malcolm, you're down to lead on.
I am indeed, Chair, but I wonder if it's okay with you whether I could take item 7 first, because it is linked to the annual governance statement and it does form part of our statutory accounts, if that's okay, Chair?
Yeah, absolutely. We've completely destroyed Tim's agenda already, so I'm sure he won't mind if we take another one out of order. So no, fine.
Fantastic. So this does form part of the formal statement of accounts, and those of you who were on the audit committee last year, I think we struggled a bit with the narrative statement. It felt a bit clunky. Now there are certain aspects and elements we have to have in by statute, so it's never going to be a bestseller in terms of its read. But what we've done this year, we've tried to actually tell the WECA story much more in this document. So I wanted to put it in front of the committee today. I mean, as I say, the full set of accounts will be coming back to the committee in September, but this is the narrative statement up front, which says about what we delivered and what the framework is for WECA. So if I just flick through the report, if I go to the main sort of document, so there's a couple of pages at the beginning which basically describes the achievements of the combined authority during 1920. And then we go on to the narrative statement itself. So it does describe the environment and the context, the aims and objectives of the combined authority. It then talks about what are we aiming to achieve in all of our respective areas, whether it's infrastructure or business growth and skills. The operating framework, which members should be familiar with. So this has been in place now for best part of 3 years, and this is our focus in terms of what are we spending our money on, what are we trying to achieve. We mentioned about the planning framework, the local industrial strategy, which governs a lot of our priority investment decisions. Performance is something we've improved significantly in the last 18 months, our business planning process, how everything links up. This is one of the areas that quite rightly Grant Thornton criticised us on in terms of last year's accounts, is what does success look like? So we've got good criteria in relation to individual projects. We've got very high level strategies which tell us what we're trying to achieve in 20 years' time. What we've now got in this document is what's the impact of our £350 million investment programme up to March 23. So these high-level indicators are in our business plan, and we've repeated them in this narrative statement. I will give a disclaimer, though, that these indicators were set prior to COVID. So if you look at things, so for example, 4,350 new jobs, we're going to be challenged, not because we're not investing in the right areas, but obviously the impact of the environment has significantly changed. So our performance management has improved. We've now got good indicators which shows what we're trying to achieve from our investments. There's sections then on financial performance, which is in its entirety, it's our management accounts, as we reported to June WECA committee. No great surprises here. We've been fairly consistent how we reported this throughout the year. The mayoral fund was as per budget. The actual WECA budget was about £500,000 underspent at the end of the year, which is due to Treasury management surpluses, which again we've been reporting regularly throughout the committee cycles. There's then a section on financial reserves. Our reserves still remain relatively modest. We've got just over £1.1 million of reserves for WECA, which is about 2.2% of our revenue budget. It's better than it was, but it's still nowhere near the levels that it would be for most unitary authorities, but we're trying to build those reserves over time. The narrative statement then goes on to talk around capital and what spend we had in terms of capital spend throughout the year. It details a high-level £350 million investment programme. It shows what's been approved and awarded by committee and how the breakdown is between the different areas of transport, housing, business and skills. And if you look at the actual investment reports which go to committee, as I mentioned in response to Mr. Redwell's question this morning, each individual project within these sections are detailed in the public domain in our committee reports. Then we talk around the spend on capital throughout the years, and there's a section then on risk and opportunities. It describes our whole way of managing our risk framework. So we have our corporate risk register, service risk registers, and then we have individual program and project risks, which are considered throughout the operations of WECA. Medium-term financial outlook, again, this is one of the areas where we had to improve upon based on the previous year's accounts. And when we published our budget in January 2020, we also published a 3-year revenue budget linked to our £350 million investment programme. So these tables within this narrative statement are pretty much a cut and paste from different reports we presented throughout the last 18 months. So it does feel that it's gelling together much more in terms of how the operations of WECA and how whole finances, performance and risks are interlinked. So this is our 3-year revenue budget, which is in the public domain. And then finally, we have a section around COVID and what are WECA doing in terms of response to COVID, and as a section on that. New responsibilities, we took on transport operations from the 1st of April 2020. Now, as I say, these accounts will relate back to period ending March 2020, but we felt we should mention this new responsibility because it's obviously quite a significant new operation that WECA has taken on. So that's a whistle-stop tour through it, Chair. It's never going to be a bestseller, as I say, but it does feel to me that it does tell a WECA story much better than where we were 12 months ago, which just seemed to be a bit of a cobbled together of individual components, if that makes sense. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Malcolm. So I've got questions from Matt and Don. So Matt, over to you.
Hi, thanks. So I've been lobbied by the cycling lobby. So I'm just looking at the opening remarks where it talked about infrastructure. The West of England Combined Authority is investing millions in bus and train travel and walking and cycling routes. And the accusation is that, in fact, very little has been spent on walking and cycling infrastructure, particularly cycling infrastructure, other than gains around highways junction improvements. So it's I'm very well aware of the millions that are being invested in bus and train travel, but I haven't really seen the evidence that walking and cycling routes have benefited the same amount, especially as this is a retrospective report for 2019 and 20. Now, I know that in June, the transport on the 19th, I believe it was, that money has now been allocated to walking and cycling. But in terms of this report, I'm just worried about whether that is a true statement for the previous year. That's my question.
I mean, can I respond, Chair? I mean, you're absolutely right. Sustainable travel, walking and cycling is very high on our agenda. And you refer to the June report. You're aware probably that the government has made available emergency active travel funding for unitary authorities. And in a June WECA committee, we decided to use £3 million of WECA funding to cash flow that, so we can mobilise some short-term measures so we can actually get walking and cycling up and running in our unitaries. And we also linked to that, as you quite rightly say, a 10 million allocation of our investment fund specifically on more permanent walking and cycling measures. So that's the first discrete allocation of walking and cycling, £10 million, which we made in June this year. However, a lot of our major transport schemes do have walking and cycling within that. So if we're looking at modifications around, we're not spending so much money on roads now, quite clearly, but when we do look at bus routes, etc., we do look at how we can integrate walking and cycling within individual projects. So it is possibly something I could feed back to future committee chair. I could look at the major walking and cycling we've done in the last 18 months as integral parts of other projects. That would help.
Well, just to come back on that, I think the thing is that we will be investing millions in walking and cycling routes, but up to this point, it's just been an additional benefit of highways improvements. So, which essentially is, you're talking about tackling congestion and improve air quality by tacking on some walking and cycling infrastructure onto highways and junction improvements. Anyway, that was just that. But yes, thank you for your offer of taking that forward.
Thank you, Matt. Dawn and then Cleo.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, just as someone who had a very mild grumble about this narrative report last year, I want to commend Malcolm for what I think is a really excellent and helpful report, and a great part of just making this more accessible to people who are not natural audit committee members or general members of the public as well. I think it's really very, very, very helpful, and thank you very much, Malcolm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Cleo.
Again, just relating to the kind of preamble to the report and some of the principles, assessments, considerations. And I'm just wondering if it's appropriate to suggest at this point that we are able to reflect on, some of the buzzwords at the moment: Build Back Better, Green New Deal, and whether we need to also have something along the lines of a well-being economy as part of our guiding principles in this. I mean, we talk about climate change, we talk about equalities to an extent. So that's a consideration for us. And that might be more for the committee itself rather than audit, but it's a note. And also, I think just something I would like noted when we talk about the public sector equalities duties, and I'm sure, a lot of the work that WECA is doing, of course, is through apprenticeships, is empowering our youth into employment, skills, etc. I know that's one of our main agendas, but I think we may need to have something more expressly noted about protected groups of underprivileged people who fall outside the scope of the Equalities Act. And I would just like that to be noted. I don't know how we can go around that, but I think more and more we should make sure that particularly our, for want of a better phrase, white working class people are expressly mentioned in such document, because they aren't currently protected. Although they experience underprivilege and disadvantage, they're not expressly mentioned in the Equalities Act. I hope that makes sense.
Chair, if I may, it does make absolute sense. I wonder, though, whether the time to actually represent those views and try and get them included in strategic direction would be when we revise our annual business plan. So, as I say, unfortunately, it is a backward-looking document, but what I've done in this document is actually pulled to the parts which in the public domain in terms of business plan we had in 1920. So, hopefully members be aware that we, as part of the budget setting process, we do set the sort of business plan and direction of WECA. And I think your points, Councillor, are absolutely valid. And when we look towards setting next year's budget and next year's business plan, I think those are the sort of things we need to incorporate in our future direction.
Yeah, can you just give me an idea of when that's due to happen?
Our business plan is reviewed as part of the annual budget setting. So it will be a draft towards the end of this calendar year, but it'll be in the public domain in terms of committee early next year. It's normally late January, early February when we look to approve a budget and business plan.
Okay, don't want to take up too much time, but if you could possibly point me in a direction of anyone to discuss that, so to make sure both of those points about the well-being economy and more wider equalities is discussed or consulted on a way to do that way ahead of that time, if possible, please?
More than happy to do that, Councillor. I mean, it's the lady who leads it on behalf of WECA in terms of pulling together the business plan is a lady called Linda Bird, so I can put her in touch with you offline, yeah?
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cleo. Gary.
Yes, thank you. I mean, basically, it's along similar lines because I'm looking at a list of activities, things that we're going to do and enable, and they're not realistic at all. We've got to have new targets and therefore new ways of allocating funds. And I can't see that the organisation has paid much attention to what's dramatically changing over the next 6-9 months and what's going to be permanent changes after that in terms of requirements and what's going to make the West of England a better and more productive place to actually live in. And it seems to be stuck in a bit of a backward-looking time warp. And surely we have to actually, as we're looking at how the money's spent, monitoring how the money's spent, we have a responsibility to comment on that aspect. And is any of the money being put into something that's now completely irrelevant?
So, Chair, obviously, the investment programme was set prior to COVID, and absolutely valid point that we're currently going through a process at the moment with the UAs to look at, are all of the projects in the programme still relevant? Should we be looking to divert some of the money into economic recovery post-COVID? It's a process we're going through at the moment. In the June committee, we identified £10 million, which we put back to the table, which I mentioned, much of which went into walking and cycling. More has to follow. So we've already allocated £5 million to the regional task force. And our view is it needs to be a much bigger figure to have real impact. Now, the purpose of WECA funding, unlike where government are providing funding to maintain business activity as is, we've got to make sure that we invest in something different to make businesses more resilient and to help them to recover post-COVID. So the point is valid. I wouldn't say we're a backward-looking investment program. I think a lot of what we've got in our investment program is still valid. We're investing heavily in improving public transport and looking to develop business skills and innovation. But the point is valid that we do need to challenge everything we've currently got in the programme and make sure we're diverting the right priorities into economic recovery post-COVID.
Thank you, Malcolm. Can I just pick up some of the points that have been raised? And the first one, Don, really appreciated your comments because those tied in with the comments that Don and I had on the report, in that it actually is readable this year and tells a story. So I think that is great tribute to Malcolm and the team for pulling that together. What I think's then interesting from the comments from other members is that the moment you pull something together and give clarity, you can more easily see what's not there and comment accordingly. So therefore that seems to me very positive because it started a dialogue, and we've got to find ways of responding to those issues. One question for you, Malcolm, is that in terms of the targets, are you saying those targets are only reviewed as part of the business plan, or will they be reviewed in the light of COVID-19 and more realistic targets put in? Because it seems slightly strange to be putting in targets and publishing them in an annual set of accounts when we know they're not achievable.
So these targets, Chair, we always had targets linked to individual projects. So when a project enters the WECA investment programme, we have clear outcomes in terms of what we're aiming to achieve from that investment. So what you've got here in this section is like a combination of all of the approved projects. So we looked at all the investment we're making in certain areas, and we pretty much added up all of those benefits across the entire programme. So these are valid based on all of the investments we've put in place. Clearly, we're not going to wait to the next business plan. We get quarterly updates from every single project in terms of how much we spent, how we're delivering against objectives. So these will get reviewed on an ongoing basis as we go throughout the year. All I'm doing is I'm flagging up that actually some of these targets, which were true when we put the whole program together, will be more challenging even when we deliver the actual investment and construction, whatever we're doing in the program. Because of COVID, there's inevitably going to be an impact on some of these indicators, which we need to keep under regular review.
But I think my question is, in terms of when we publish the narrative, are these targets going to be in the narrative because they were the ones at the end of the financial year, or are we going to update them for what would now be considered success in the light of the post-COVID circumstances? Because what we have there, we are unlikely to produce new rail journeys and new bus journeys, for example, at that level, because we aren't even going to achieve the existing level. So we need to recalibrate. Otherwise, this section, whilst it's got all the right reason and intentions, isn't going to say anything meaningful.
I totally understand where you're coming from, Chair, but again, this is a problem in terms of backward-looking documents, isn't it? But these indicators and this narrative is what we used when we set the 2020-21 budget as part of a business plan, which was approved in January 2020. So these were, it is basically what we're aiming to achieve on the 3-year plan up to March 23. I think your point's valid. I think we tried to put a narrative about actually the outcomes could be impacted by COVID. I think if anything, maybe we need to expand on that. It's difficult for us to quantify how COVID will impact on things such as rail journeys, because at the moment, as you know, because of social distancing, even if we implemented another 5 stations tomorrow and got all the Metro West up and running within whatever time span, the rail journeys are going to be impacted depending on how long social distancing will remain. So I think it's difficult to change the numbers. I think maybe we need to explain a little bit more on the narrative as to why COVID will impact on those numbers, but we're still doing the right things in terms of investment.
Well, certainly it will be my view that we need to alter the narrative, but I must admit, I would have liked to have seen something in respect of numbers that we know aren't achievable being reconfigured in some way, even if it was as in brackets after the figures that are set here, or in some other way, because otherwise we're presenting a document that has a target that was superseded almost as soon as it was set. So that's just a personal view that I'm hoping we might be able to consider.
Okay.
I see Don and Gary have got their hands up again. Don?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think rather than Malcolm reworking the narrative every time circumstances change, perhaps just a paragraph from the end, sort of health warning, saying COVID and its possible impacts would be appropriate, rather than kind of changing history. I think that's what Malcolm's saying, is we can't revise history the whole time, but we need some way of updating it while keeping a record of where we were when this year happened.
I think that's exactly what I was trying to say, Councillor. That's very, very helpful. And I think, listening back to the previous question, we will need to revisit the investment programme. As part of that, we'll be looking at, are all of these investment projects still relevant? Hopefully, most will still be. Some will change, and we will divert some money into different areas, at which point we need to relook at the entire indicators in terms of what does success look like in the new world. But going back and trying to quantify some of these figures, they do reflect the investment we have currently in the programme. If we change the programme, the numbers will change. But I'm happy to add a narrative.
Okay, thank you, Don. Gary?
Well, we're not necessarily going to change all the programme. Some of it, we want to finish up in a place, for example, with the public transport. Our intention is to get rid of gridlock and have less people travelling in cars. But obviously, the actual numbers in here don't make an awful lot of sense now, because, for example, almost certainly permanently, we're going to have a lot more people working from home. So whilst the plan was right, some of the aspects of it will still be absolutely the right thing to do, we must urgently put something in here because, as has been said, it's a reasonably readable document. The disadvantage of that is the public might actually read it, and then they look at it and say, well, this just is not it's not realistic. So we do need not just a sentence, but a decent statement on how this is now going to be updated in the light of new situations.
And I think I'm agreeing with everything that's been said, but I'm just questioning whether that's in this document, because we need to work it through. And you're absolutely right, Councillor. The vast majority of our investment programme won't change, because it's absolutely right to invest in public transport to improve the bus offering, the rail offering, walking and cycling. That will still stand. But there will inevitably be some elements of the investment programme which will change. And at a point in time, I think we need to make it really clear in the public domain, where are we going to reinvest part of the programme and what's the impact on performance measures.
Right. Thank you, Malcolm. I see no other hands. So at the end of that, we note the draft narrative report, and I think Malcolm's noted our comments. So I think on that basis, we can then move on or back to item 6, which is informing the audit risk.
Okay, so I'll introduce this briefly, Chair. So this is the third part, which is linked to our statutory accounts. So the annual governance statement and a narrative statement are the two documents which are part of the accounts. Informing the audit risk is the initial risk assessment undertaken by our external auditors, Grant Thornton. They ask a number of questions of us in terms of the control framework, and you'll see in this document, or the appendix to this document, our management responses in terms of where we're at. So it's for information. It's a key part of the initial work that the external audit do, and it's down for the committee to look through and just reflect the fact, is it a true reflection of where we are in terms of our control environment. Barry or Sophie, I don't know whether primarily is your document is the appendix, whether you want to say anything to this.
Thank you, Malcolm. If I could, so as you said, this is a key document for informing the audit risk assessment. This replaces the 2 letters which we previously would have taken to management and the chair of the audit committee. So as a result, it is important for the committee to consider the responses and ensure that those give a true and fair reflection of the committee's view as well.
So I think, Chair, rather than go through page by page, I was just going to open it up to any questions or observations that the committee might have.
Please, members who would like to say something. Or indeed, who would like to say anything. Matt.
Councillor Waite has his hand up, I think, Chair.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, Andy first and then Matt.
I do, and thank you for pointing it out, Matt. Just a couple of points on the document. Page 28, question 10. The way I read that is I don't think the second question has been answered. There seems to be 2 questions there. How do you mitigate the risks associated with fraud related to related party relationships and transactions? There doesn't seem to be an answer next to that, which slightly concern me. And the other point is on page 45, to do with bad debts. And I'm concerned that the bad debt provision, it says debts are reviewed monthly and any debts that are deemed to be irrecoverable will be written off. But we don't know from that statement what the sort of figure is for bad debts. Is it reasonable for us to have some indication as to how much is written off in that way? Thank you.
So, Chair, I could take the second question first. That's an easy one. We don't write anything off because we have no debts. So at the moment, although we've got to go through this framework and answer the auditor's questions, we're not an authority which actually generates income in that way. There's not to say that won't happen in the future, but at the moment, any debts which do relate to us are probably more around the business rates, where we contribute towards the overall pooling the business rates pilot across the region. But we as an authority don't have any bad debts as such. And question 10, which I think I'm on that page at the moment. Are we aware of any related party relationships or transactions? Not aware. How do you mitigate the risk associated with fraud related? Yeah, I see what you're saying. There's no real answer to the second question, but yeah, okay. So we might need to have a look at that one.
Matt, did you have a question?
Well, I had the same point on item 10 that Andy raised, but I also, I mean, in similar comments to the previous document, I appreciated this and found it quite easy to digest. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Joe, were you trying to catch my attention? Yep.
Yeah, I was just following up from, about if a question isn't applicable because this is not what we do, it needs to be made explicit that that's the case, because if these reports are meant to be for the public or they're available for the public to consume in some way, then surely it needs to be explicit in the report that if a question's not being answered, it's not being answered because it doesn't need to be answered, not because it's just been omitted, ignored, or mistaken, left out. So that would just be the point that I would raise, that it needs to be made clear if you're not, why you're not answering a question.
Absolutely valid, Chair.
Thank you, Joe. Mark?
Thanks, Chair. Just a point, I guess, with regards to some of these factors regarding, say, the performance management, and also as we've looked at business continuity, and say also things such as compliance around gifts in kind and whistleblowing. How are we actually auditing those on an ongoing basis? That's the question, I guess, Chair.
Whistleblowing, and is Jeff Ring still on the line, or has Jeff dropped out? Because whistleblowing is actually managed through our internal audit service. We've got a clear policy which we publish, but as of yet, there's been no referrals through the internal auditors. Sorry, Mark, I missed the first part of the question.
Yeah, the first part of the question's around things such as the business continuity planning, and also things such as performance management. How do we ongoingly audit those to make sure they're fit?
So performance management and business continuity arrangements go through the WECA committee. So we do have regular updates. I say we publish a business plan at the beginning of the year, which has indicators in, and then periodically throughout the year we update the WECA committee in terms of performance information. And business continuity is part of our overall planning framework, which is again refreshed on an annual basis. But it doesn't. We did have. I'm looking to the chair here, but we did have a whole sort of performance framework presented to the last audit committee, Jeff, I think, didn't we? The monitoring and evaluation framework which was presented. So periodically we do call it into the audit committee to have a look to make sure it is fit for purpose.
Yes, I can't remember which meeting, but we certainly recently we've had that. I think interesting in terms of the Mark's comments. One of the issues I think we need to revisit from time to time is whistleblowing, and something we perhaps need to understand a little more how that will work, because I think whistleblowing in a relatively small authority is probably a lot harder than whistleblowing in a large authority where there are more appropriate channels. So I think that's possibly something. All the issues that Mark raised are things that we probably should be having a report on once every couple of years. And I think we can perhaps check, Malcolm. I think this committee has done so in the last couple of years on each of those, but we ought to just check that we have that sort of diary to bring up from time to time.
I agree, Chair. I think certainly the monitoring evaluation framework, performance management, business continuity, we have reviewed fairly recently, but maybe the whistleblowing is one. It's easy for me to say there's been no referrals. We're a small authority, but maybe you're right. Maybe we do need to bring that back to the audit committee just to check the arrangements are robust. So it's something we can either take to an informal committee or maybe put on the agenda for the September one.
Yeah. I think probably that should be in a full meeting if we can.
So if I could just come in there, Chair. So we did look at the counter fraud arrangements last year. And obviously one of the recommendations that we discussed before was around fraud and corruption, around training, etc. So part of that was also reviewing the whistleblowing policy and approach, and we helped with management put together the policy and framework that we have in relation to fraud, corruption and whistleblowing. And I'm very happy to bring back a specific report in that particular area to give confidence to the committee around the arrangements that we have in place. I think the wider point that which Mark raises around constant or continuous auditing is an interesting one. So normally the approach within most of the public sector is that we put frameworks in place and we monitor those controls both through the second line of defence, which is our finance teams, HR teams, etc. And then we use the audit teams to check on those intervals based on a risk-based approach. So I wouldn't describe that as a continuous approach, but it's one that's risk-based and appropriate to the resources that we have available. But very happy to pick that up with Mark separately if he wishes to have a more detailed conversation about that. And in terms of the performance management, yes, we did look at that last time. We looked at that in some detail. And we looked at the assurance framework as well in some detail. When the bird came to the committee. So we did actually go through that very, very detailed and long document that we went through, just to give the committee some confidence.
Thank you, Jeff. Anybody else got anything on this item? No? Okay. So we are requested to confirm that the management response to the auditor risk assessment is a true reflection of the authority's management process. Everybody in favour of that?
Yes, Chair.
Anybody against? No? Okay, so that is done. So item 11 on the agenda, fee scale for the audit 2021. An update on 1920, page 109 to 116.
Okay, Chair. So this is a standard letter from the public sector audit appointment. So it sets out the parameters for the fee scale for the 2020-21 financial year and provides an update in terms of what's topical in terms of the external audit. It does set the rate. It does say the rate for the 2020-21 audit is the same as it was for 1920, but unhelpfully it is down to local negotiation in terms of how much audit work we do require. The committee will remember that last year, above the standard scale rate, we did commission or had to commission further work from Grant Thornton because of the problems we were having with the accounts. We did manage to get a reimbursement from our contractors, so it's a net neutral effect. We're hoping this year that there'll be no surprises. I mean, I liaise regularly with Barry and Grant Thornton to make sure that the fees are appropriate and make sure that work the external auditors do complement the internal audit offering as well. So it's just for the committee's information, but I thought it'd be useful just so you understand how we're governed in terms of the external audit fees.
Yeah, may I come in and make a comment to what Malcolm said? So the number that you've seen on page 114 is different to the figure that we've already discussed and presented to the audit committee in relation to the plan. So I would just emphasise that as PSAA have set out on page 114 and 115, whilst they've set the audit scale fee is the same as last year, which is 18,600. We've already agreed, as Malcolm said, that actually that fee is not sufficient. The reason for that is, well, as Malcolm partly said, due to some of the issues last year, but those, irrespective of those, the scope and nature of the committee has changed quite significantly over the years since this scale fee was initially set. So we agreed with the audit committee that the scale fee going forward would be 30,384 as reported at the last committee. But again, that is subject to further changes as a result of the introduction of the NAO code on VFM, which is coming in next year. So I would just ask members to read sort of all the sort of paragraphs in page 114 and 115, which says this is the scale fee, and then this is why the scale fee is not correct.
I think Barry's trying to politely say, Chair, this is not an overly helpful document because actually, although it sets a baseline, in every single case, that baseline will be exceeded in every authority because we have to incorporate other local changes.
I think it's one of those intriguing challenges that baffles me, along with most of the current international auditing standards we have to comply with as well. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not just saying it because Barry's in the room, but we've had we've had, in my view, very good service from Grant Thornton, who have been very fair in what they've done and very professional in the way they provide the service. So I'm very happy that we leave that fee for Malcolm and Barry to agree and simply report back to us, and I trust members would agree with that as well. I think we'll have to do better next time, though, Barry, than have the only thing you've got to contribute on is your fee. We'll have to work on the agenda to make sure we.
Chair, we've got the next paper as well, which Sophie will take you through, which is much more interesting.
Right. Okay. Well, so yeah, I think that takes us on to item 12, which is your paper on the impact of COVID-19. Now, members have had this and had a chance to read it. So, Sophie, if you want to, if you would like to speak briefly to this.
Thank you very much, Chair. So yes, I'm pleased to present this GT publication to committee today. This is one of our national reports that we've produced, and it covers the impact of COVID-19. So I think it's safe to say that authorities are working in an environment that is completely different to the one that they were in even just months ago. So within this report, we explore some of the key considerations that have come out of the pandemic, and that's in terms of financial reporting and other wider considerations. So it is a national report, as I said, and so many of the considerations are more applicable to councils, but there are potential financial reporting and regulatory impacts which WECA should consider and has considered within its narrative report as well. So it provides some key challenge points for members. It provides some insight into the national challenge faced by the sector as well. I think the most important page for WECA to be aware of is probably page 133 of the reporting pack. There are some key considerations here, such as what is the outlook for the authority? Have they disclosed that? What's the impact on cash flows as a result of COVID-19? What about known budget pressures, any changes in resources and the authority's plans for dealing with those? So clearly it's not always possible to predict the long-term impact of COVID-19, but there is some disclosure required as to how the authority's looking at that. So things like future plans and activities and any changes in strategy that WECA may be looking at. Also any changes in WECA's risk assessment as well. So are there any actions that the authority now needs to take or to plan in response to this pandemic? The next page as well, page 134, covers some key disclosures which will be relevant to WECA. So that's things like going concern disclosures, which is mentioned in the heading to the report as well, and the impact on any significant estimates and judgments that WECA may make as well. There are also some wider considerations to be aware of with everyone now working mostly online or entirely online. There are some cybersecurity factors to be aware of, and we do set those out on, I think it's page 135. And then on page 141, there are some further resources from CIPFA and various other bodies which may be of interest to members as well. There's quite a bit of guidance from CIPFA and from the Financial Reporting Council, the MHCLG as well. So as it notes on here, it is a constantly evolving situation, and so some of the information included within this report may change over time. But I do hope it will be helpful to members in providing a national view.
Right, thank you, Sophie. Questions from anybody? Well, if I just start the ball rolling, Malcolm, I presume the only direct impact on Weka will be in the very small amount of the collection fund that will be impacted in the next 2 financial years, but which doesn't impact in the current financial year. Is that right?
You are right. There's the 2 main things for us. That is one, absolutely. So the collection fund, the business rates share of a pilot is worth 1.2 million for us, and then that's part of our core revenue budget, which funds some of the operational costs of Weka. So we're very mindful that is a risk. It will impact certainly significantly in 2021-22, but there will be some impact in the current year as well, 2020-21, which we're currently reviewing. And part of the outturn report last year, we put some money in specific reserve, knowing that we're gonna have a reduction in business rates income. The second area which is impacted on us is our treasury management returns, because we are a cash-rich authority in this terms of the money coming in from government and the timing of the money going out. So between now and March 23, we'll spend the entire 350 million that we've received in that time from the programme we've set out. But at the moment, you'll be aware that in the management accounts, we've made a significant return on treasury management activities from investing our cash flow, primarily on 12-month fixed-term basis with other local authorities. The interest rates have fallen significantly, and our returns on our cash balances are much less now than they were when we set the budget. So that's another area where we're keeping under constant review. One thing we are doing is obviously our neighbouring unitary authorities are struggling with cash flow as well in terms of timing of government grant coming down and a need to spend as a result of COVID. So one of the things we did present to the WECA committee in June was actually, can we use some of the WECA cash balances as a short-term loan scheme with our neighbouring unitaries? And we've actually enacted that one now. So as we're not going to get a huge return anyway, it's absolutely right that we should help our unitaries out by using the WECA cash flow in a structured way and helping with our unitaries cash flows as well. So the 2 areas of our budget, as I say, is our returns on investment and our business rates income, which we're keeping under constant review, but it will impact, definitely.
We're just following on from that, therefore, we haven't lost income, and therefore we don't have anything for central government to be making up to us, and we haven't incurred significant additional costs, and therefore we don't have anything that will be compensated for in that respect either.
That's absolutely right. There's no money coming through to the combined authority other than direct support for bus operators, which was referred to earlier in this agenda. We have been for some time lobbying, as of other combined authorities, about having to put the budgeting of combined authorities on a stable footing, because it's not just the business rates retention. We also receive annual grants for mayoral capacity funds. That's £1 million for Weka. So between mayoral capacity fund and business rates retention, you've got 2 core income streams which add up to 2.2 million, which fund the core operating costs of a combined authority. So we've got security and confidence over the 30 million a year long-term investment program. We haven't got certainty over our revenue resources. So it's something we've been lobbying, irrespective of COVID and the impact on the economy. It's something we've been lobbying central government for some time about. You need to put combined authorities on a stable footing if we're going to deliver this longer-term ambition.
Thank you, Malcolm. I'm just looking to see if anyone else has got any comments or questions. It appears not. So I'll just check, is there anything that anyone wants to raise regarding today's meeting? In which case, if I can thank you all for attending, thank officers for their time, and I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.